For 7 hours, he was insulted, kicked, and ignored. Dozens of wealthy people and hundreds of ordinary people passed by him. Not a single person turned to look at him. Billionaire Arthur's cruel experiment was about to prove the failure of humanity. Just as he was about to give up and return to his empty, wealthy life, he saw her, an old woman, who seemed poorer than everyone else, was walking toward him with the one thing that could change their destinies. Picture this: a gleaming African metropolis where glass towers pierce the sky while tin-roof shacks sprawl below like scars on the earth. Two worlds existing side by side, yet separated by an invisible wall of wealth and circumstance. This is where our story unfolds. And trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll never look at human kindness the same way again. What if I told you that a single piece of bread could change the fate of an entire city? That one act of generosity could transform a billionaire's heart and impact thousands of lives? You might think I'm exaggerating, but the story I'm about to share proves that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power. Meet Arthur Sterling, a man who has everything money can buy but nothing his soul craves. At 55, he sits atop a financial empire that spans continents, making decisions that affect millions. His penthouse office overlooks New Dalaba, a fictional but achingly real African city where progress and poverty dance their eternal waltz. Arthur controls banks, industries, and markets, yet he cannot control the emptiness that consumes him daily. But Arthur wasn't always this cold. Years ago, he was a different man, softer around the edges, with dreams that extended beyond profit margins. He had Martha, his beloved wife, whose laughter could fill their modest apartment with warmth. They weren't wealthy then, just two people building a life together, believing that love could conquer any obstacle life threw their way. Then came the diagnosis, a treatable condition, the doctor said, but treatment required money they didn't have. Arthur watched helplessly as the woman he loved deteriorated, not from an incurable disease, but from a curable one that poverty had made fatal. He knocked on doors, pleaded with relatives, begged strangers for help. The responses were always the same: sympathetic nods followed by closed doors and empty promises. Martha died on a Tuesday morning while Arthur held her hand, whispering apologies into her ear. Something died in Arthur that day, too. The part of him that believed in human goodness, in compassion, in the basic decency he thought existed in everyone's heart. Her death became the fuel for his ruthless climb to the top. Each business deal a small revenge against a world that failed them both. Now, 15 years later, Arthur has everything he thought he wanted. Money flows through his accounts like rivers. Politicians seek his approval. Business leaders hang on his every word. Yet every night, he stands at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city's lights, feeling more isolated than ever. The wealth he accumulated to honor Martha's memory has become a prison, separating him from the very humanity he once belonged to. The transformation wasn't gradual. Success hardened him like metal in a forge. Each closed deal, each competitor crushed, each worker laid off in the name of efficiency chipped away at whatever remained of his former self. He justified it all as necessary, as the price of power in a world that showed no mercy to the weak. But deep down, a question gnawed at him. Had he become the very type of person who would have turned away from his younger, desperate self? Enter David, Arthur's assistant, and perhaps the only person who remembers the man Arthur used to be. Originally from Nairobi, David had worked his way up from the mailroom through sheer determination and Arthur's grudging respect for his competence. David possessed something rare in Arthur's world: genuine loyalty mixed with moral courage. He wasn't afraid to challenge his boss when necessary, though he chose his battles carefully. David had witnessed Arthur's gradual transformation and understood its roots. He'd been there during the worst days, watching Arthur work 18-hour days as if exhaustion could somehow numb the pain. David knew that beneath the cold exterior lived a man drowning in grief and guilt, a man who had convinced himself that cynicism was wisdom and that isolation was safety. The city below Arthur's tower tells its own story. New Dalaba represents the complex reality of modern Africa, where gleaming shopping malls stand blocks away from markets, where vendors fight for customers willing to spend a few coins. The upper city boasts amenities that rival any global metropolis: high-speed internet, climate-controlled buildings, restaurants serving cuisine from every continent. Meanwhile, the lower quarters pulse with different energy, raw and immediate, where survival requires daily creativity and community bonds run deeper than blood. This is where we meet Elara, 70 years old and weathered by life storms, yet somehow still standing. Her small vegetable stall in Makoko Market represents her entire world. Every morning, she arranges her modest inventory. A few tomatoes, some onions, leafy greens that she hopes to sell before they wilt in the heat. Her tin-roofed shack sits among hundreds of others, a maze of narrow passages where neighbors know each other's troubles and joys intimately. Elara's story could break your heart if you let it. She lost her husband to illness and her only son to violence, tragedies that came years apart but left cumulative scars on her spirit. Yet somehow, inexplicably, these losses didn't embitter her. Instead, they deepened her capacity for empathy, as if suffering had expanded her heart rather than hardened it. Her neighbors seek her counsel not because she has answers, but because she listens without judgment and offers comfort without expecting anything in return. The contrast between Arthur and Elara couldn't be starker. He commands resources that could feed her entire neighborhood for months, while she counts coins to afford her daily bread. He lives in climate-controlled comfort, while she endures the heat and humidity that define New Dalaba's rainy season. Yet in terms of human connection and spiritual wealth, their positions might be reversed. This disparity weighs on Arthur's mind during one particularly sleepless night. Standing at his window, watching the city's rhythm below, he makes a decision that will change everything. If humanity has truly failed, if compassion is merely a myth perpetuated by the naive, then he will prove it once and for all. He will become what Martha once was, helpless, desperate, invisible. He will test the very society that failed them both. The plan he devises is both simple and profound. For one day, Arthur Sterling the billionaire will cease to exist. In his place will walk a nameless beggar, stripped of every advantage wealth provides. No connections, no credit cards, no safety net beyond a small emergency transmitter hidden in his rags. Just a man in need, testing whether the milk of human kindness has truly curdled in the heat of urban indifference. David initially resists the plan, understanding its dangerous psychological implications. He's watched Arthur's mental state deteriorate over the years, seeing how isolation has warped his perspective. This experiment could either provide the proof Arthur seeks of humanity's failure, or could destroy what remains of his boss's faith in existence itself. But Arthur's mind is made up, driven by a need to confirm his worst suspicions about human nature. The preparation is meticulous. Arthur studies the homeless population, learning their mannerisms and survival strategies. He practices holding his body differently, making himself smaller, more vulnerable. Makeup ages him. Dirt stains his clothes, and careful technique transforms his manicured hands into rough appendages of manual labor. When the transformation is complete, even David struggles to recognize the man who signs his paychecks. The chosen day arrives with New Dalaba's typical intensity. The sun beats down mercilessly while humidity turns the air thick as soup. Arthur, now unrecognizable in his disguise, enters Makoko Market as morning vendors set up their stalls. The transformation isn't just physical. He must also shed the confident posture and commanding presence that money has given him. Instead, he learns to make himself invisible, to move through crowds without drawing attention, to embody the kind of desperation that makes people look away. What follows is a masterclass in human indifference. For the first hour, Arthur is simply invisible. People walk around him, past him, through him as if he doesn't exist. This anonymity stings more than he expected. He's grown accustomed to being noticed, to commanding attention simply by entering a room. Now he experiences a particular pain of social irrelevance, of being so far beneath notice that he might as well be a piece of street furniture. The second hour brings verbal abuse. A fish vendor, annoyed by Arthur's presence near his stall, launches into a tirade about lazy beggars and worthless parasites. The words hit harder than Arthur anticipated, each insult carrying the weight of genuine contempt. He realizes that being ignored was actually preferable to this act of hostility, this reduction of his humanity to a social problem that needs solving. Physical violence comes in the third hour. A baker, irritated by Arthur's loitering near his shop, strikes him with a wooden paddle used for removing bread from ovens. The blow sends Arthur stumbling, his expensive dental work cutting his lip against his teeth. The pain is sharp and immediate, but the humiliation cuts deeper. This is what powerlessness feels like. He realizes not just the inability to change your circumstances, but the vulnerability to random cruelty from those who see you as less than human. The fourth hour brings a different kind of assault, social media mockery. A group of young people spot Arthur huddled against a wall and begin filming him for their social media accounts. They narrate his misery like sports commentators, making jokes about his appearance and speculating about his life choices. Their phones capture his lowest moment and broadcast it to hundreds of followers who respond with laughing emojis and cruel comments. Arthur experiences the modern form of public humiliation, where personal suffering becomes entertainment for others. Religious hypocrisy arrives in the fifth hour, embodied by a well-dressed man carrying a Bible who stops near Arthur to deliver an impromptu sermon about God's love for poor. The man speaks passionately about charity and compassion while pointedly avoiding eye contact with Arthur. When the sermon ends, he walks away without offering help, leaving behind only the bitter irony of beautiful words divorced from meaningful action. The sixth hour nearly breaks Arthur completely. Exhaustion, dehydration, and emotional trauma combine to send him into a state of near collapse. He finds himself in a narrow alley, rain beginning to fall as New Dalaba's afternoon weather patterns assert themselves. His fingers find the emergency transmitter hidden in his clothes, and for several minutes he considers ending the experiment. He's gotten what he came for, confirmation that humanity is indeed as callous as he believed. The evidence seems overwhelming and irrefutable. But something stops him from pressing that button. Maybe it's stubbornness, or maybe it's the small voice of his former self suggesting that 6 hours might not be enough to judge an entire species. The rain increases, soaking through his thin clothes and washing some of the makeup from his face. He sits in that alley, water running down his face like tears, wondering if this is how Martha felt in her final days, abandoned, forgotten, reduced to a problem nobody wanted to solve. That's when Elara finds him. She's returning from a difficult day at the market, her unsold vegetables heavy in her arms, when she spots a figure huddled in the alley she uses as a shortcut home. Rain has turned the narrow passage into a small river, and the man seems oblivious to the water rising around him. Most people would hurry past, eager to reach dry shelter. But Elara is not most people. She approaches slowly, recognizing particular stillness that comes with despair. Her weather hands clutch a small bag containing her dinner, half a loaf of bread that represents her meal for the evening. Without hesitation, she tears the bread in half, offering the larger piece to the stranger. Her voice is gentle, speaking in the local dialect mixed with English, asking if he's hurt, if he needs help getting somewhere dry. Arthur looks up at this elderly woman extending food to him, and something inside his chest cracks open. Here is someone who is even less than his beggar persona pretends to have, offering to share what little she possesses with a complete stranger. The bread in her outstretched hand represents not just food, but hope, dignity, and recognition of his humanity when everyone else had denied it. Their conversation is brief but profound. Arthur, still maintaining his disguise, asks why she would give when she has nothing to spare. Elara's response is simple and devastating. She knows what it feels like to have even less. She's been where he is, has felt the particular hunger that comes not just from empty stomachs, but from empty hearts. Her generosity flows not from abundance, but from understanding, not from duty, but from genuine compassion. As Elara helps Arthur to his feet and offers directions to a nearby shelter, he realizes that his experiment has yielded results he never expected. Yes, he encountered cruelty, indifference, and hypocrisy. But he also found something else. Pure, uncalculated kindness from someone who had every reason to be bitter and selfish. One person, one act of generosity, has shattered his carefully constructed worldview. The transformation that follows happens overnight, but its roots run deep. Arthur returns to his penthouse, a changed man, carrying Elara's piece of bread like a talisman. He places it in a glass case, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what he almost lost: faith in human goodness. The bread becomes his most precious possession, worth more than all his stocks and bonds combined. Finding Elara again requires all of Arthur's resources, but money that once seemed like an end in itself now serves a higher purpose. When she's brought to his mansion, confusion and worry cloud her features. She can't understand why someone like Arthur would summon someone like her. Can't imagine what she might have done to warrant such attention. The revelation of Arthur's true identity shocks Elara into silence. The beggar she helped was this powerful man. Her small act of kindness was actually a test. But as Arthur explains his journey, his pain, and his transformation, she begins to understand. Her compassion touched something in him that money couldn't buy and power couldn't create. Genuine human connection. Arthur's response to Elara's kindness goes beyond personal gratitude. He establishes Elara's Kitchen of Hope, a network of food centers throughout New Dalaba's poor quarters where anyone can receive a hot meal without questions or judgment. The program employs local residents, sources ingredients from neighborhood vendors, and operates with a kind of dignity that preserves self-respect along with providing sustenance. But Arthur's transformation demands more than charity. It requires justice. He returns to Makoko Market, this time as himself, to confront those who showed cruelty to his beggar persona. The baker who struck him finds his business loan called and immediately. The young people who mock him discover that their social media accounts have been flagged and restricted. The hypocritical preacher faces exposure of his financial irregularities. These aren't acts of revenge, but of accountability. Arthur doesn't seek to destroy these people, but to force them to confront the consequences of their actions. Some respond with genuine remorse and attempts at redemption. Others retreat into defensiveness and blame. But all must reckon with the reality that their treatment of the vulnerable has consequences beyond their immediate satisfaction. The ripple effect of Arthur's transformation spread throughout New Dalaba like circles on water. Elara becomes a respected figure in her community, not because of her newfangled wealth, but because of her unwavering dignity and wisdom. The feeding centers become gathering places where neighbors connect across class lines, where children do homework while their parents share meals, where elderly residents find purpose in volunteering. Arthur himself becomes a different kind of businessman. His companies still turn profits, but now they also turn problems into solutions. He invests in affordable housing, microfinance programs, and educational initiatives. His boardroom decisions are filtered through a new question. Would the person who was in that alley approve of this choice? The changes aren't without challenges. Some business partners find Arthur's new priorities incompatible with their profit maximization goals. Shareholders question investments that prioritize social impact over immediate returns. Arthur faces criticism from multiple directions. The poor sometimes view his efforts with suspicion, wondering about his motives, while the wealthy often see his transformation as either naive or calculating. But Arthur has found something worth more than universal approval: peace with himself. The guilt that drove him to accumulate wealth has been replaced by purpose that drives him to distribute it wisely. He sleeps better now, no longer haunted by Martha's memory, but inspired by it. She would have approved of Elara. He knows, would have recognized in her the same generous spirit that characterized their early life together. The visual transformation of New Dalaba serves as a metaphor for the internal changes in its residents. Where once sharp lines divided the upper city from the lower quarters, now bridges both literal and figurative span the gap. Arthur funds infrastructure projects that improve living conditions while preserving the tight-knit community character that makes places like Makoko Market special. David, Arthur's loyal assistant, plays a crucial role in these changes. His understanding of both worlds makes him an ideal bridge between Arthur's vision and its practical implementation. He helps navigate the complex cultural dynamics that arise when wealth tries to assist poverty without destroying its dignity. His counsel keeps Arthur grounded, reminding him that good intentions require wise execution to achieve meaningful results. The story reaches an emotional crescendo during the first anniversary of Arthur's transformation. Elara's Kitchen of Hope hosts a celebration that brings together people from across New Dalaba's social spectrum. Former enemies share tables. Children play together regardless of their parents' economic status, and the evening air fills with laughter and music that drowns out the usual urban cacophony. Arthur watches from a comfortable distance, not as a patron receiving gratitude, but as a witness to something larger than himself. The celebration isn't about him or his money. It's about community, connection, and the simple human need to gather in joy. His contribution was merely the catalyst for something that already existed in potential within these people's hearts. Elara approaches him during the festivities, her weathered hands now steady on a walking stick Arthur had specially made for her. She thanks him not for the material changes he's brought to her life, but for allowing her small act of kindness to matter. This perspective shift amazes Arthur. In her mind, he did her a favor by being someone she could help. Her gratitude flows not from what she received, but from what she was allowed to give. The conversation between them reveals the full circle of transformation. Arthur admits that he designed his beggar experiment to prove humanity's fundamental selfishness, to justify his own isolation and cynicism. Instead, her kindness proved the opposite, that compassion exists even in the harshest circumstances, that generosity can flourish even in poverty soil. Elara shares her own revelation, that helping the stranger in the alley reminded her why she keeps going despite her losses. For months, she'd been questioning her own purpose, wondering if her small life mattered to anyone. The opportunity to ease someone else's suffering renewed her sense of meaning and connected her to something larger than her personal grief. As the evening winds down and guests begin to disperse into New Dalaba's cooling night air, Arthur reflects on the journey that brought him here. A year ago, he stood in his penthouse convinced that human nature was irredeemably selfish. Tonight, he's surrounded by evidence to the contrary. People who choose kindness over cruelty, generosity over greed, connection over isolation. The rain that characterized Arthur's darkest moment has stopped, replaced by clear skies that reveal stars usually hidden by the city's glow. Children chase fireflies between the tables, while adults share stories and plans for the future. The scene represents everything Arthur thought impossible. Genuine community bridging economic divides, hope flourishing in places where despair once reigned. But perhaps the most significant transformation is the quietest one. Arthur no longer stands apart from humanity, observing it like a scientist studying specimens. He's become part of it again, connected by threads of obligation, affection, and shared purpose. The walls his grief built around his heart have crumbled, replaced by bridges that connect him people like Elara, David, and countless others whose names he may never know, but whose lives he's touched. The final scene of this remarkable journey finds Arthur and Elara sitting together on a simple bench outside the main feeding center. Around them, New Dalaba pulses with its eternal rhythm. Vendors calling their wares, children playing in the streets, the distant sound of music and laughter. But the chaos no longer seems threatening or alien to Arthur. It's become the soundtrack of home. Their conversation touches on the future. Plans for expanding the feeding program, ideas for additional community projects, dreams for a new Dalaba where prosperity doesn't require poverty as its shadow. But mostly they sit in comfortable silence. Two people whose unlikely friendship has changed not just their own lives, but the trajectory of an entire city. As night settles over New Dalaba and the last customers finish their meals, Arthur helps Elara lock up the center. Her keys jingle softly as she secures the door, a simple sound that represents something profound. The end of one day's service and the promise of tomorrow's renewal. This is what purpose sounds like. Arthur realizes, not the ringing of cash registers or the buzzing of stock tickers, but the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work completed. The story concludes with Arthur walking Elara to her new home, a modest but comfortable house he built for her near the feeding center. She insisted it be no larger than necessary, no fancier than her neighbors could aspire to own. Even in acceptance of his gifts, she maintains a dignity and wisdom that first captured his attention in a rain-soaked alley. At her door, they exchange good nights with the easy familiarity of old friends. Arthur heads back toward his penthouse, but his steps are lighter now, his posture more relaxed. The tower that once felt like a prison has become simply a place where he sleeps, no longer the fortress from which he wages war against a hostile world. Looking back on this extraordinary 24-hour period that stretched into a year of transformation, we see the power of a single human connection to change everything. Arthur's story reminds us that wealth without compassion is poverty, that power without purpose is weakness, and that the barriers between us are often more fragile than we imagine. The bread Elara shared in that alley cost perhaps 50 cents. Yet its value exceeded Arthur's entire fortune because it represented something money cannot buy. the recognition of shared humanity, the insistence that no one should suffer alone, the simple truth that we all deserve kindness regardless of our circumstances. In a world that often seems divided by unbridgeable differences, Arthur and Elara's story offers hope. It suggests that beneath the surface divisions of class, race, and nationality lies a common core human need and capacity for connection. Sometimes it takes extreme circumstances to reveal this truth, but it's always there, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look. The transformation of New Dalaba serves as a metaphor for what's possible when compassion guides action, when those with power choose to use it for healing rather than harm. The city's progress isn't measured only in new buildings or improved infrastructure, but in the bridges built between communities, the dignity restored to forgotten people, and the hope kindled in places where despair once reigned. Arthur's journey from cynicism to compassion proves that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose connection over isolation, generosity over greed. His story challenges us to examine our own assumptions about human nature, to question whether our judgments about others might be barriers to our own growth and happiness. Most importantly, this tale reminds us that heroism doesn't always wear a cape or wield supernatural powers. Sometimes it looks like an elderly woman sharing her bread with a stranger, or a wealthy man learning to see beyond the walls of his own privilege. Sometimes salvation comes not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of recognition, acknowledgement that we're all in this together, all deserving of dignity and care. The rain has stopped falling on New Dalaba, but the seeds planted during that transformative storm continue to grow, spreading hope through communities that had almost forgotten what it looked like. And in that growth, we find the promise that change is always possible, that connection can triumph over division, and that the simple act of sharing bread can indeed change the world.